Good morning. Welcome to Center for Spiritual Living, Greater Pittsburgh. My name is Rebecca Harmon, and I'm one of the practitioners here with CSL Greater Pittsburgh. And it's my great pleasure this morning to bring you this message based on the writings of Florence Scovel Shinn. Florence Scovel Shinn is a well loved New Thought icon, and she lived in the early part of the last century. Her writings are few, they're limited. There are four known books, and one of these actually was compiled after her death, but her influence can be felt across the globe. In fact, if you've ever listened to an audiobook by Louise Hay or watched one of Louise Hay's movies or seen one of her presentations at a seminar, you have been touched by the wisdom of Florence Scovel Shinn because Florence Scovel Shinn's writings were deeply influential on Louise Hay. Mrs. Shinn's simple presentation and storytelling manner around the use and application of spiritual principles make her work a must read, in my opinion, for anyone on the spiritual path. I get a lot of questions from people, whether they reach out to me from my blog or they know me and they reach out to me in person. And they simply want to deepen their understanding of spiritual metaphysics, or their life isn't going the way that they wanted and everything they tried heretofore is not working. And so they're looking for a new option. There are two things that I recommend. The first is to go onto YouTube and find the audiobook, How to Get What You Really, 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 Really Want by Deepak Chopra and Wayne Dyer. And although that was recorded for, I believe, for a PBS special back in the late 90s, it is timeless wisdom that I still turn to. It is Spirituality 101. The other resource that I recommend is How to Get, nope, I'm sorry, The Game of Life by Florence Scovel Shinn, which is what we're going to talk about today. So most of us know Deepak and Wayne, but we may not be aware of who Florence Scovel Shinn is. And so I'm going to talk about who she is and why we should care about that. Florence Scovel was actually born in 1871 in Camden, New Jersey. Her father was an attorney, and she ended up going to college when she was old enough and studied at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts. She met Everett Shinn in college, and they married after graduation and moved to New York City, where many people in the artistic realm would live then and now. She became an illustrator of children's literature. She published her works in books and magazines, and she became interested in and very proficient at teaching spiritual metaphysics. Her classic book, The Game of Life and How to Play It, was self-published by her in 1925. And if we think about how many years ago this was, many years before Kindle and Amazon and the whole concept of the common person being able to self-publish, that was quite a feat. And to know that today, The Game of Life and How to Play It is available internationally as a metaphysical text is it just lends more credibility to the strength of her writing. In 1928, she wrote Your Word is Your Wand, and then The Secret Door to Success, she wrote right before she passed away in 1940. She came to be very well known in metaphysical circles in New York because she held these group meetings or what she called salons where people would come and either bring problems that they were having to her or just come to discuss metaphysical spirituality with her. Her writings are filled with the examples of people that came to her. Of course, she doesn't identify who they are, but these stories are so rich because they're common, everyday people with regular problems and struggles and life challenges that she uses to teach how to apply metaphysical spirituality principles to solve these problems in our own lives. I think we can relate to these people. I think a lot of their issues are very similar, even though they were 100 years ago. I think they're similar to what we experience today. Now, one thing we have to accept if we're going to read Florence Scovel Shinn is that she teaches using a lot of biblical language and a lot of examples that sound kind of at the surface to be overtly religious. But what we have to understand is that the Bible, the Hebrew scripture, and the Christian text, these are deep metaphysical texts, similar to things like the Tao Te Ching, the Upanishads, the Bhagavad Gita, many, many other ancient spiritual texts also teach deep metaphysical truths. The Bible does as well, But if we're going to read Mrs. Shinn's writings, we have to accept that when we read her, we're going to be exposed to a lot of Bible verses and a lot of talk that sounds religious. But if we hang in there, there's a lot of rich, rich wisdom that we can learn. I want to share a couple of things from this book, The Game of Life. She writes that most people consider life to be a battle, but it is not a battle, it's a game. It's a game which cannot be played successfully without a knowledge of spiritual law. And Mrs. Shinn goes on to teach us that the Hebrew scriptures and the New Testament give us the rules. And again, I'm going to mention that all those other ancient wisdom texts do as well. They give us the rules of this game of life. She says with wonderful clarity, the game of life is a great game of giving and receiving. And she quotes this Bible verse, whatsoever we sow, that shall we also reap. And this means that whatever we send out in word or in deed or in energy or attitude, it will return to us. What we give, we will receive. So if we give love, we'll receive love. If we give criticism, we will be receiving criticism. If we lie to people, we'll be lied to. If we cheat others, we'll be cheated. She also reminds us that our imaging faculty, which is just a kind of an older way of saying our imaginations, plays an important role in this game of life. Neville Goddard, of course, taught that our imaginations were critical in manifesting the lives that we want. This means that what we visualize persistently, what we obsessively think about, these are the things that are going to show up or externalize in our lives and affairs. And so Mrs. Shinn reminds us that to play this game of life successfully, we must train our imagination or get a hold of our obsessive thoughts, get a hold of our default attitudes and thinking. A person who visualizes the best in every situation will indeed bring into their life every righteous desire of their heart, health and wealth, love, friends, perfect self expression, their highest ideals. The imagination, she tells us, has been called the scissors of the mind. It is ever cutting and pasting. We might use kind of a modern computer analogy. It's cutting and pasting day by day the things that we see, the things that we put our attention on, and pasting these together to be the experience or the things that we experience each day in our lives. And I want to give you an example that I'm pretty sure most of us can relate to. Whenever I have thought about buying a new car or noticed an unusual car, all of a sudden that car starts showing up in my life. And I bet that you've had a similar experience when you thought about buying a new car and all of a sudden you start seeing this new car everywhere or a different car. It doesn't even have to be a new one. A few years ago, I was in traffic and I drive SUVs. So I usually drive much bigger cars. I looked over in traffic and I noticed this small green boxy car. And it was so unusual, it just kind of caught my imagination. It caught my imagination enough that I checked out what it was. It was a Kia Soul, and I, a few days later, looked up on the Kia website and found out that the paint color was called alien green. All factory paints have a specific name. So there's this alien green Kia Soul, very unusual looking car, very different than any kind of car I would drive. I started seeing this thing everywhere. It was in traffic every morning, a different one, not the same one. It would be in the parking lot at the Giant Eagle. I even saw one drive down my street. It seemed like everywhere I went, I would see a green Kia Soul. I even saw one at an airport in Louisiana when I was traveling on business. These things were seemingly showing up everywhere. Well, it might be tempting to think that someone was monitoring my thoughts. And as soon as I paid attention to that green Kia Soul, a troll in a cave somewhere opened the gate and all these green Kia Souls began to stalk me. That's not what's going on. What's going on is that my conscious awareness focused on this different car, this green Kia Soul. And instead of those cars continuing to be background noise in the sea of traffic, in the sea of parked cars, in the sea of people that drive up and down my street, they came out from the background noise and into the front of my conscious awareness. So that whenever there was a green Kia Soul in traffic, I would My subconscious mind knows that my conscious mind paid attention to it, and so I would notice the green Kia Soul. I would see it in the parking lot. I would look out the door at the time that one was driving up the street. This is the important lesson in understanding this game of life. We have to train our imagination. We have to train what we think about, what we bring into our conscious awareness. So, if it's not cars, if what's in our conscious awareness is seeing all the lack and limitation in our life, like that green Kia Soul that kept showing up for me, lack and limitation will show up for us. It won't be background and incidental, it will be front and center. Same thing if we're focused on in our conscious awareness on not having uh, relationships that we want. Evidence of not having this relationship that we want will be everywhere instead of just being kind of background part of the tapestry. And so we have to understand this concept so we can train our thinking, train our imaginations, and understand that, Socrates, how many hundreds of years ago said, know thyself, maybe thousands. We must know ourselves. We must understand that this is how we are so that we can pivot from only seeing lack and limitation, because that's what's in our conscious awareness. We can pivot to seeing abundance and good and plenty. In practitioner training, we learn this, but Florence Scovel Shinn also taught that there are three levels or departments in our mind: the subconscious, conscious, and the superconscious. Now, the subconscious is raw power. It has no direction. It just does what it's told, and it's told by the conscious mind. Our subconscious, she related it to steam or electricity. So if you have a steam generating engine and you have a steam pipe, the steam is just going to rise in the direction of the pipe. So if the pipe goes straight up, the steam's going to go straight up. If the pipe goes over here and up here and kind of convoluted, the steam's going to follow that route. The steam does not stop halfway up and wonder why it's going straight up or on a convoluted. It just goes. It's just raw power. This is our subconscious mind. The things that we focus on with our conscious mind just go. Our subconscious mind takes them. So if we focus on not having enough, the subconscious mind says, we don't have enough, we don't have enough, we don't have enough, we don't have enough. And it looks around to bring us experiences that validate not having enough. Same way, subconscious tapped me on the shoulder each time a green Kia Soul was around. And so I was able to see that. So the conscious mind I mentioned is our human mind. It's what we have control over. We have control over what we put our attention on. We have control over what we think about. We have control over what we visualize and imagine. We have to remember that because the conscious mind is what feeds the subconscious mind. And then the superconscious mind I'll discuss in a minute, but that is the God mind that we're connected to. I want to share a couple of the stories that Mrs. Shinn writes about with working with people and this concept of understanding the subconscious mind and the conscious mind. She writes about a woman who came to her to ask why her life was now poverty and limitation. This woman had at one time lived in a beautiful large home surrounded by beautiful things, but she had grown weary of managing the household. And she would say to her friends and acquaintances over and over, I am sick and tired of things. I wish I lived in a trunk. Well, what happened eventually is that she lost all of that. And today, the day that she went to see Mrs. Shinn, she truly was living out of a trunk. She had spoken herself into poverty with her over and over again talk. Another story about another woman who, again, was very well to do, but she would always joke that she was getting ready for the poorhouse. And a few years after that, she was near destitute. But she had impressed this idea of working herself to the poorhouse into her subconscious mind, which just, it doesn't take a joke, it just moves forward. And she had pictured lack and limitation, and that's what showed up for her. The good news is that this spiritual law works in reverse too. So if you can speak yourself into the poorhouse, you can speak yourself into abundance and prosperity and plenty as well. Now, I mentioned the superconscious mind, this mind of God within each of us. This is the realm of perfect ideas, and we have access to it. And we know that we do because every one of us at one time or another has had a flash of inspiration or had an idea that when we thought about it for a minute, we thought, oh my goodness, that's too good to be true, or that's impossible. I could never go there, or I could never do that. But The truth is, this is our destiny. It is flashed to us from the infinite intelligence that we're connected to and immersed in. And each and every one of us has access to this. This intuition is important. Florence said that intuition is a spiritual faculty. It does not explain, but it simply points the way. She reminded all of her students, and she teaches us in her writings, that to pay attention to hunches is a critical skill in using and applying metaphysical principles. And she tells this story about a woman that came to her for a treatment for prosperity. And treatment is a word used in metaphysics that means prayer. Slightly different context, but the easiest way to explain it is that it's a prayer. So the woman came, she was worn out, she was tired, she was dejected and discouraged with life. She had only $8 to her name, and she came to Florence Scovel Shinn for help. And Florence said, "We will bless the $8 and multiply them in the same way that the 5 loaves and 2 fishes were blessed and multiplied in the story in the Christian text." I love that. That's a great metaphysical story, by the way. And one of these Sundays, I think I'll probably talk on that concept of multiplication. So the woman heard what Mrs. Shin said and said, "What do I do next?" And Florence said, "Follow your intuition. Do you have a hunch to do anything, to go anywhere?" Intuition means being taught from within. And we have to understand that we are connected to that infinite intelligence. So when we get that hunch or we get that feeling, or we feel that very subtle nudge, it is our guide. Florence Scovel Shinn wrote that it's our unerring guide. The woman said, "I don't know. I seem to just have a hunch to go home. I've got just enough money to get there." Now, intellectually, if we were to use logic, here's a woman that lived in a small town where there wasn't a lot of opportunity. She had come into New York City to seek the counsel of Mrs. Shinn. If we were a career counselor or a guidance counselor of some sort or a life coach, we might say, "Well, you need to stay in the city where there are more opportunities and get a job." That's the answer. But that would be logic speaking. Her hunch was to go back home. And Florence told her, don't violate. She would say, then go home. Never violate a hunch. And I don't know about you, but I grew up with mother and grandmothers that taught me to trust my gut. And I taught my children that, and I remind my grandchildren that. Always pay attention to your gut. Always follow those hunches because they are divine wisdom coming to us and whispering in our ear and tapping us on the shoulder. So she told her to go home to follow her hunch. And then Mrs. Shinn spoke the following affirmation for her: "Infinite Spirit, open the way for great abundance for her. She is an irresistible magnet for all that belongs to her by divine right." And she wrote it down and gave it to the woman and told her to speak this for herself as well. It's an affirmation. So the woman went home and she went to visit someone in her small town a few days later and ended up running into an old friend of her family. And through this friend, she ended up receiving thousands of dollars in a miraculous way. She later communicated to Mrs. Shinn that she was grateful for her counsel and said, "Please tell others about the woman who came to you with only $8 and a hunch." I think I mentioned that the writings of Florence Scovel Shinn are not plentiful, but they are so powerful. They're relevant today, as relevant as they were in the early 1900s, and they're uplifting. They give us hope and they inspire us in ways that we can relate to. Again, because I think they're the stories of regular, everyday Americans who are just trying to get through life. Give yourself the gift of Florence Scovel Shinn if you haven't read her, or give yourself a re-gift of revisiting her if it's been some time since you've read her works. To summarize her teaching, I've distilled it down to a couple of points. Number one is our persistent thinking and focus on things that creates our experiences. We must learn to pay attention and identify what is our default response, what is our default perspective. You may remember Michael Bernard Beckwith in the movie The Secret said that energy flows where our attention goes. So true. So important to remember. Another thing that Florence Scovel Shinn taught us is that we must practice paying attention to our intuition. Intuition is a spiritual faculty and does not explain, it simply points the way. That's what Mrs. Shinn taught, and it's so true. Follow those hunches. Don't ever go against a gut instinct. And the third thing is that affirmations work. Mrs. Shinn did not spend a lot of time speaking long, elaborate prayers. She spoke the word, as she calls it. She spoke the word for people. She gave them affirmations. She would say them and know them, and she would give them to her clients. So we know, and Louise Hay was a big believer in affirmations. We know that affirmations work. So I encourage all of us to spend time crafting the lives that we want by writing down some affirmations that affirm the lives that we want to live. And I've put together a few of Florence Scovel Shinn's affirmations that I'm going to share with you. I actually share these in a every Thursday through something called a daily thing, which comes out from Blackbirds Rising, which is a focus group with focus ministry with CSL um, Centers for Spiritual Living. And so every Thursday, one of my pictures, I take these pictures and then I find a quote to go with it. And a lot of my quotes end up being Florence Scovel Shinn. So I'm going to share a few of Mrs. Shinn's quotes with you now. The four winds of success now blow to me my own. From north, south, east, and west comes my endless good. This is a great affirmation if you're feeling that you're stuck and success is not coming to you, success in any realm. This is a great affirmation for that. I banish the past and live in the wonderful now where happy surprises come to me each day. This is a wonderful quote if we feel that we are suffering under the burden of something in our past. Now is the appointed time. Today is the day of my amazing good fortune. That's just a wonderful affirmation to start the day with. My ships come in over a calm sea, under grace, in perfect ways. And this ship is one of the Columbus, the three sailing ships replicas from that group that brings the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria around and teaches living history. So they were in Pittsburgh a few years back, and I took my grandchildren down there, and it's just such a lovely shot. And I thought it was a perfect accompaniment for this quote by Florence Scovel Shinn. So when you're waiting for something good to come into your life, this is a wonderful affirmation to know with peace and calmness that your ship will and is coming in over a calm sea. That means without challenge or difficulty, under grace and in perfect ways. The unexpected happens. My seemingly impossible good now comes to pass. No matter what it looks like, affirm that your good is coming now. And then there's this one. I walk in the light and my fears dwindle into nothingness. That's a wonderful one for late at night when you wake up worried about someone you love or some situation in your life. As I am one with the undivided one, I am one with my undivided good. And this happy sunflower reminds us of this beautiful affirmation. I have a wonderful joy in a wonderful way, and my wonderful joy has come to stay. Just a happy affirmation to uplift us when we're feeling a little under the weather. My favorite one in times of trouble is this one. I took this picture at South Beach, Miami, Florida, a few years ago. And it is a quote that is, in my opinion, one of the strongest and I don't know, just most supportive in times of trouble. And the quote is this: It is dark before the dawn, but the dawn never fails. Trust in the dawn. And so these affirmations and many others are available in the writings, in the books that Florence Scovel Shinn wrote. And I encourage you to pick up her book. A lot of her work is available in newthoughtlibrary.org. You can find a video, or I'm sorry, an audio book recording of The Game of Life and How to Play It on LibriVox.org. And if you Google Florence Scovel Shinn, There's a whole host of resources to find. Her complete works, which include the 4 books that I mentioned at the beginning of the talk, are available for 99 cents on Amazon, the Kindle version. And if you go out on the internet, you can find many, many resources of the writings of Florence Scovel Shinn. So I want to thank you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at future services and future activities. If you have any questions, you can always email us. We have a form on our website. Click on cslgreaterpittsburgh.org in your open your browser and enter cslgreaterpittsburgh.org and click on practitioners and you can send us a message. I hope you'll come back, join us again soon. Until then, take care.